Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Brian Potter. You may remember him from episode 131 on Katerra, the rise and fall of $1 billion construction startup. Brian is back on the show today, and the topic is, why is it so hard to innovate in construction? And construction actually is extremely innovative and forward-thinking in many, many ways. But because of the risks associated with innovation and the risks of running projects and the multiple parties involved in a project, innovation can move at a slower pace. And so we talk about why it's hard to innovate in construction, get into a little more detail on that, and how construction companies can innovate. And the thing I like about Brian is that he brings in industry insiders' perspective on innovation. So he's not just like some software geek who thinks he's got a great idea to solve construction's problems, coming from the outside, swooping in from Silicon Valley or something like that. And I think it'll be very interesting for you to pick up on some pointers that Brian has in terms of what companies focus on to make innovation happen in their businesses. We also take some time to discuss the difference between the United States, Europe, and Asia in terms of innovation. And we touch on some opportunities for innovation in terms of 3D printing. So enjoy my interview again here with Brian. If you have any feedback, feel free to reach out to me and share Construction Genius with anyone that you think may benefit from listening. And of course, and I'd really appreciate this part, if you could please give us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, that would be terrific. We're close to 100 reviews on Apple Podcasts, and we've got like a 4.8 rating. So those 5-star reviews are totally killer. They're really helpful. And if you could give us that rating or review, I would deeply appreciate it. So enjoy my interview with Brian here today, and thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Brian, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
You know, one of the criticisms I hear from outside of the industry from many people is that we are slow to adopt new technologies. We're not super innovative. There's so much more that we could be doing if we only got our act together. But your thought on that is that given what it is that we actually do when we're building a project, the construction industry is quite advanced. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the construction industry, I think, is actually fairly advanced when you, like you said, when you consider what they're doing, which is trying to deliver a very large, expensive project, with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different moving parts in sort of physically difficult conditions. And you see that we, the industry, deliver those projects fairly reasonably well, which is they generally come in fairly pretty close to budget. They can obviously go wildly over budget, but that's surprisingly rare given the number of project buildings that go up, and sort of the fundamental difficulty is when you look at other kind of industries that have produced very large projects, you see them oftentimes go very wildly over budget. Even in something like IT projects, which, software is sort of the typical example of an extremely innovative industry that has sort of advanced a lot farther than sort of a more traditional one like construction. But you see, new IT projects or introducing a new software system, those projects just tend to go very wildly over budget in a somewhat similar fashion that construction projects can do. The difference is that the economics of that industry are such that their margins are so much higher that they can recoup their costs a lot more easily than construction can, where the margins they're operating under are very, very low.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think that begins to get us into this whole idea of why it's hard to innovate in construction. And it has a lot to do with those margins and the risk associated with any change from what you're used to. But based on your experience in the industry, what is your take on why it's hard to innovate?
Sure. So the what it kind of comes back to is just the risk and kind of the risk profile of the various sort of groups at work that go together to put a building together. Like I said, the construction industry, I actually think is fairly advanced in that there are a lot of risk controls in place to really try to understand exactly who is taking responsibility for what, and exactly, how we are going to, pay for this, and whether this project makes sense, stuff like that. There's a lot of sort of cultural infrastructure around making sure, trying to understand exactly how much risk and what is at stake. And that really shapes how a building goes together. And so kind of the sort of idea that I've kind of been working with is that this kind of makes it difficult to introduce new innovations in sort of the construction process. A building has so many different sort of subcontractors and different moving parts and different sort of areas of responsibility that you really need to understand how all those are interacting and how one person's work affects another person's work in order to keep a project on track and to prevent it from going wildly over budget. And so anything that sort of can upset that process, even if it has the potential to sort of save money, if you are introducing a new process that people don't necessarily understand very well, and if it's new, nobody might understand it, even the sort of inventor of it. If you have a new building system that, a new sort of structural beam or something that has to go into the building in a completely different way, nobody might understand how that impacts the electrician or, the framer or any of that stuff. And because any sort of disruption to the process can make the project spiral wildly out of control, it is very hard for something to save enough money to make up for the sort of penalty it's paying in terms of increased risk to the project based around that uncertainty.
So that's the thing, right? It's like, yeah, this innovation is cool. Let's try it somewhere down the road. But right now I need my building built on time, on budget, without many incidences. Yeah. So having said that, in your experience, would the approach to innovation be a micro approach as opposed to a macro approach?
Sure. So yeah, there's kind of a couple things that you can kind of see. One thing is that, you see a lot of new and innovative products that do make a big difference, but they tend to be things that don't have to disrupt the overall process. So, Advantech has like a sheathing that has like, different properties and makes it easier to install and has like the water barrier built into it, which makes it go into the building quicker. But that doesn't change anything fundamental of how your building goes up, for example.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it's a better widget, but it's not a completely radically different widget with a way of putting it in.
Exactly.
And so where should the drive for innovation come from on a construction project or within the industry? Who should be initiating this and sort of leading the charge?
Sure. So I have a couple of thoughts about it. One thing is that the more you can sort of be vertically integrated and the more you can kind of encapsulate what you're doing so it doesn't have to sort of involve as many other parties, the more you can sort of internalize that, the better off you're going to be. I used to work in the precast industry, and a lot of precasters, the one I worked with in particular, but also others, are fairly vertically integrated. And this gives them a lot of leeway to sort of try to come up with new building systems that can maybe make a building go together more efficiently or be used on kind of new other types of construction that precast hasn't traditionally been able to do. And they're able to do this because they are completely, to some degree, vertically integrated. They are going to internalize all the benefits of it. They understand how the system interacts with all the other parts of it because they are putting the entire thing together. And so that's kind of a big one. Another one is...
So hold on, let me just interrupt you there. So if I'm hearing you right there, a lot of the innovation can come, let's say, from a subcontractor as they work within the sphere of their scope of work and just do that scope of work better. Did I hear that right?
That's true. It's that. And then also just, to the extent that your innovation will not impact someone else's down the line. And that's
Right.
hard in construction because there's not necessarily a ton of things that fall into that category. And part of it is that it's not necessarily obvious what is going to affect another discipline and what isn't. That's kind of the fundamental problem, right?
Yep.
The structural engineer may think his new cool thing, his new sort of wall framing system is really great, but if it may make the electrician's job much harder to sort of run his wiring. The structural engineer may have no idea that that's the case.
So it's interesting though, because, someone's got to, I see there's two types of innovation. There's the doing what you do and doing it better. And then there's the introduction of, let's say, a new technology. And initially, at least, that the introduction of the new technology sometimes may be more expensive, or because of the unknowns that you're describing, may be more risky. What are the roles of the owners of the project in terms of driving this innovation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that you can kind of see is that if your innovation has something to offer other than just pure less cost, if you can do something with it that is very, very hard to do, that with the traditional system, where you can really deliver a lot of value specifically to the owner, you're going to have a much easier time selling it. One example that I can point to is there's certain systems where they're trying to replace rebar in concrete with just like sort of steel fiber. And that's been around for a while, but this is sort of steel fiber that is able to sort of replace structural rebar. So it's a little bit of a different product. And kind of what they've had a lot of success in selling to is clients that really, really, really care about slab integrity and slab shrinkage. And while their technology has the potential to sort of reduce costs and reduce time, if they're able to sell their particular benefits to a client that really has some specific urgent problem that needs to be solved, that can kind of offer a little bit of a toehold in for sort of developing an innovation.
That's interesting. So in your experience, what characterizes a construction company, whether they're a GC or a sub, that is effective at innovating within the realm of the projects that they're executing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, the kind of ones that are, they have a lot of scope. They're not just doing one narrow part of the project. They have kind of control over a large portion of it. The ones that are sort of being able to have like a particular value proposition, not that just they are the lower cost provider, but they are going to give you something that you as a client really, really care about, that is beyond just kind of money. If you can kind of compete on value and deliver something that is not easy to deliver in kind of any other way, that kind of opens up a lot of space for kind of new products and kind of being able to continue to push that envelope because you have clients that maybe care about that specifically.
So you have, I know that most construction companies have tech vendors approaching them, or industry vendors approaching them with new ways of, skinning the cat, et cetera, et cetera. But internally in a construction company, how should it position itself in order to be able to be innovative while at the same time executing the projects that they have on hand profitably?
Sure. I think a big one is to just kind of think what you're delivering, what kind of value you're delivering, and try to place like the risk much more at the top of your list in terms of things you care about, in terms of, not just can we deliver this process or this product cheaper, but can we reduce the risk of the people that are doing it, or can we prevent ourselves from increasing somebody's risk? And you can often take the same idea and sort of repackage it in a different way, such that what may have increased somebody's risk can now decrease it. An example, I'm a structural engineer, and so I have a lot of familiarity with, different structural products, and people try to introduce new ones just the same as they do in any other part of the industry. And, a new product in for a a new structural product, that is sometimes for the structural engineer of record, that's sort of a difficult pill to swallow, because they have to understand the system. They have to sort of spend extra time reviewing it. They have to kind of learn how it works. They have to be really, really careful when they sort of are detailing it to make sure they don't accidentally, again, mess up some other downstream part of the project. But if you can sort of take your system that you're selling and say, hey, we're going to do this as a deferred submittal, you don't have to do it at all. We will take it and we will stamp it and we will provide the whole design. Now, instead of increasing the structural engineer's risk, you've now decreased it with the same sort of product. And this is becoming fairly standard with, I would say, new building products. It's very hard to sort of introduce one if you're not going to do a deferred submittal for this exact reason.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because we're talking about the movement of risk, not necessarily the elimination of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you appreciate that people are reluctant to take on risk, any additional risk than they need to.
Of course.
And so how does from a structural engineer's perspective, of course, you'd be super happy if the contractor is willing to take on more risk and take it away from you.
Mm-hmm.
How does a construction company manage that in such a way so that they're comfortable with it and they don't get sort of bit in the butt by taking on that risk?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a difficult proposition, but for a subcontractor, if they have some new system that they want to do, they're in a little bit of a advantageous position, because if they're going to do this system, a ton of many different times, they have the sort of ability to kind of learn it ins and outs and put the time and effort into understanding it in a way that sort of an engineer or another, contractor that maybe is only doing it once can't necessarily justify it.
So here, let's talk about that then. So if I'm a construction company and I'm thinking about innovation, perhaps I should be targeting a building system or a process that I know I'll be using again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really solid one. Yeah, if you can do something in a really repeated fashion where you can, amortize the cost of having to sort of really pay close attention and really track it very closely and really invest a lot of initial design time. If you can structure it in such a way so that can pay off later, that's obviously, a potential way in for an innovation. The sort of the structure of the industry in some ways makes that difficult, but it's not impossible, obviously.
Yeah. And so that requires a contractor to have, if you're going to have an innovative mindset, it's almost as if you have to set aside a portion of your business in your mind to go through that innovative process and to understand that you may have failures in that innovative process. And that is actually part of innovation, is the failure.
Yeah, exactly. You're never going to get something perfectly right the first time. There's always going to be a learning curve for how you do a new thing. And I think the way to think of it is, can you think of this as an investment, right? It's like, I'm going to take the time and effort to learn how to do this new system on this project. And it may not pay off for me on this project, but if I can learn how to do it, and if it's able to sort of reduce my costs, reduce my time going forward, that's an investment that'll pay off in the future, just like investing in any other part of your business.
So that requires then, on the contractor's part, whether it's a sub or a GC, an ability to sell that innovative idea to their project partners, to the owners, to the other folks involved in the project. And what I'm hearing here is the importance of the relationships that all of the project partners have built. And particularly if you have a repeat customer, let's say. I have lots of clients who have repeat customers, and perhaps through those repeat customers where you've built that relationship, those are the folks where you can go to the owner or go to the GC, talk with the project partners and say, hey guys, on this project, for this portion of the project, we want to try something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's obviously, again, the more that's going to be something repeated, someone you're going to work with again and again, you have that option. Of course, this can kind of cut both ways, right? Because if you have a repeat client that you've sort of worked to build up trust with, maybe you're maybe not super willing to sort of jeopardize that on a new system. So it's very tough.
It is, isn't it? It is. It is. Where do you see in the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years, where do you see some key innovation trends in construction really coming into play that might be adopted on a fairly broad scale?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's just getting more and more expensive to put up buildings. We're seeing just a across the board increase in building product cost. Some of those are coming down, but some of them seem like they're maybe not coming down. Labor is getting harder to find. It's only going to kind of get more expensive. I think people are going to become a lot more sensitive to those sort of trends. And if, I can't necessarily predict the future, but if those kind of continue, you're going to see a lot more pressure on things that are going to be able to reduce labor and reduce, time and sort of cost of something that's going to go up.
So then that would bring in, I know one area that you've done a little bit of thinking around is this idea of 3D printing. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely an innovation that has sort of been bubbling for years, and you get, you get this something happening in the Middle East where they're going to build all their buildings 3D printing and all this kind of stuff. Give me in your mind, the current state of 3D printing. And really, is that something that can be an innovation that is broadly adopted?
I think probably in the next 5 to 7 years, I think that is not super likely. I think 3D printing is really interesting because it has such a parallel in just 3D printing for manufacturing, and so you can kind of look at the history of it in sort of that realm, and sort of try to see if you can extrapolate into sort of the building construction world. And if you do that, you kind of see some interesting things, and because 3D printing in sort of manufacturing, it started out much like it is now in construction. It's super niche. It's only used for it's in some ways just kind of a toy. It doesn't, it can't really be used for anything serious, but and that's sort of, I would say, not quite true for concrete and building 3D printing, but it's a very small world right now. The number of buildings that have been 3D printed are very, very small, but so it kind of ends up mattering more than anything else is how fast that technology improves. And what you saw with like smaller and manufacturing 3D printers is the technology got so much better so quickly that it very quickly became something that could be reliably used for much more industrial commercial level things. And so I kind of, you can kind of look at the current state of building 3D printing and say, oh, there's so many problems with this. You have to set up all this finicky equipment. They, the sort of lines and resolution, they don't look super great. It's maybe not as fast as I think it should be. I could put up a building with normal concrete with so much faster than this, blah, blah, blah. And some of those, are certainly true. But I think almost all that is immaterial. What matters is how much faster the technology improves. That's going to dictate, I think, entirely whether it becomes a new standard of construction or if it's just kind of another system that you maybe have the option to use competing amongst 20 others, which has pluses and minuses and is not like dominant.
In your experience looking at the global construction industry, do you see a difference in the willingness to adopt innovation between, let's say, the United States, Europe, and Asia? Do you see any difference there?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar, I would say, with Asia. I know they have a lot of, there's a lot of people over there, folks that are really willing to sort of put a lot of money into sort of new building systems. One that you can kind of, if you look every few years, they come out with a new video broad group of a video of them building a skyscraper just incredibly quickly. Yeah. And they've been able to pump just, hundreds of millions of dollars into that system. It's unclear if it'll pay off, but I'm glad that they're willing to sort of make the attempt. And in Europe, it's kind of interesting. The sort of they're very willing and very interested in just prefabrication, just in general. You see a lot. I would say a broad characterization would be that you see a very high level of just panelization and prefabrication to a much higher degree than you do kind of in the US, where we've been just very willing to sort of keep putting up buildings manually by hand on site. I've heard that a lot of that has to do with kind of the labor cost that they face, and kind of it makes it worth it. They have a lot of very highly automated panelization plants over there, and I think we have some in the US, but I think it's not developed to near the degree that it is over there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I think of Asia, I think of again that speed that the ability they have to get things done. Mm-hmm. In Europe, just the mindset of looking for new ways of doing things. And then in America, it seems like many times it's, hey, this is just the way that we've done it. Construction is extremely litigious. And so therefore, if anyone makes a mistake, then it could cost not only, time, but it could cost a bunch of money. We might get to court, all these kinds of things. And so I'm wondering if the American system, the business system in America, hinders that innovation in any way.
Yeah. And, one thing that you kind of see is you see a reasonably strong correlation between where stuff get built in the US and how easy it is to build it. The states that are building the most are like, Texas, Phoenix area, the Southeast just in general. And those just, A, they tend to have kind of a lower cost of construction in general. And B, it's just in general, and I need to kind of do more research about it. So this is just going to be a kind of broad characterization, sure. But in general, it's the sort of land use rules and zoning and stuff tend to be a lot less stringent in those parts of the country. Yep. It's compared to something like California, where it's maybe very, very difficult. You're going to face a lot of opposition to build any sort of large scale project. And that's not necessarily true in other places of the country. And you see that kind of reflected in kind of where stuff is built.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's ironic that California would be considered a hub of innovation in Silicon Valley. And yet the practical innovations, the hands-on innovations in the construction industry are hindered by all of the regulations.
Yeah. And it's interesting, especially because California used to be a place where just incredibly large housing developments, really sort of the sort of craft of mass producing, single family homes was really kind of honed there with these really, really, really large housing developments. And you just don't see anything like that today, and you haven't for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're wrapping up here, in your experience in the industry, what characterizes the companies who really do innovation best in construction?
Yeah, I think it's the ones that have found some, area of focus, and they're able to just really hone in on that specifically. It's like I said, Precaster is the one that's like focus. I've noticed a couple that have like new building systems, and there's actually quite a few of them that are kind of willing to develop. It's interesting because you kind of don't see that as much in anywhere else, but that are really able to focus on something, and ones that are able to really command kind of a really large fraction of the market, such that they can put more money into sort of innovation than they otherwise maybe would be. And that's kind of tough in construction, because just the size of the things you're putting up means that in some ways it's still a very regional business. But the sort of businesses that have been able to sort of have a sort of very wide reach. And I'm thinking of building product companies like Simpson or like Nucor. They are really able to sort of really put a lot of, money into sort of R&D in a way that other sort of smaller scale companies just simply can't afford to do.
Excellent. And Brian, just remind us here as we're wrapping up, where can people find you if they'd like to learn more about the work you're doing, the stuff that you're writing on?
Yeah, I write a newsletter that comes out weekly-ish. It's at constructionphysics.substack.com. Excellent.
And we'll put a link in the show notes to that. As I'm looking at your blog, you've just put up a piece on construction costs. You've got a piece on robotic bricklayers, and some stuff on wood construction and the risk of fire. So it's really neat. You're kind of touching on a variety of different topics there.
Yeah, I try to sort of break off one little bit sliver of the industry at a time and just try to really dive into sort of the mechanics of kind of what makes it tick, and then, what we can kind of learn from that.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure to link in the show notes to Construction Physics. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show again here, Brian.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Today's episode was brought to you by the Construction Conclave. If you as a construction leader would like to develop your skills and get involved in a community of like-minded construction professionals who are focused on building healthy teams, profitable projects, and long-term successful businesses, then the Construction Conclave is for you. It's a private, invitation-only group of construction leaders that are focused on developing their leadership skills. We do training every single month online that looks at how to become a better leader in a very practical, straightforward way. We also have other events that build community and camaraderie so that you can associate with others who are interested in developing their skills as leaders. If you'd like more information and to see if you qualify for participating in the conclave, feel free to reach out to me, eric@ericanderton.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and thanks again for listening.